Well, it's mostly a geoeconomic energy partnership, much more than a geopolitical alliance or a military alliance. This is also included, of course. But I think from the beginning we were talking about the importance of the international north-south transportation corridor in signing the whole thing, because the Russians are going to invest in rubles a lot of money to have the corridor completed as fast as possible. On the Russian side, it's very easy because basically it's from St. Petersburg to Astrakhan by rail. They already have that. But the Iranians need investment, navigation across the Caspian Sea, and obviously other littoral Caspian members are interested as well, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, etc. And of course, building highways from north to south of Iran, and then the infrastructure of ports in the south of Iran to go to Mumbai. I'm sorry, to go to Mumbai. And the China, for the moment, the China issue was reduced by Trump himself to the TikTok issue, which is also immensely fascinating. Because I was looking at the shareholder breakdown of TikTok. 20% of the shares belong to the founder. 20% belong to TikTok employees all over the world. And 60% belong to 3 American funds. So what does that tell us? That the Americans already have a shareholding control of TikTok. What do they really want? They want to buy the shares of the founder, those 20%. So then they'll have 80% total absolute control. And then, they would, you can sell ads in the US. We'll let you do it. Right? Another thing that, for instance, Trump got 36% of the youth vote in the US on social networks. And guess who was instrumental to get these votes? His son, Barron. Barron was telling Trump, you should go here, you should go there, or you should be on TikTok. This is absolutely fascinating because Trump knows very well that TikTok was instrumental to elect him. And now he wants a direct dialogue with these hundreds of millions of young Americans and hundreds of millions of young Chinese who started to pay attention to him as well. So the TikTok thing is a monster PR operation, in fact, which, of course, Trump can package as another win. And it's not by accident that he announced to everybody, TikTok is back. He already announced that as his own win. And now he wants win 2.0, which is okay. And now we're going to have the absolute majority of the shares, 80% instead of only 60. This is fascinating. So the China issue at the moment is TikTok. Can you imagine if Xi and Putin were talking about TikTok on their phone call? Okay, we can always dream, right? But this would be the ideal David Lynch style dialogue between Xi and Putin. The Indians are paying attention to that as well because for the Indians, their Silk Road, or let's say their Silk Road 2.0 is the port of Chabahar, south of Iran. The same thing, not very far from Gwadar port in Pakistan. For the Indians, the first Indian idea was, okay, we're going to use Chabahar to build our maritime and then overland Silk Road. So, you leave Mumbai, you go to Chabahar. From Chabahar, there is a highway that they built, by the way, to the Afghan border. And then we have access to Afghanistan and to Central Asia. So this is progressing very, very slowly. There was a lot of American pressure against it, etc. But now the Indians have a second possibility of a Silk Road, which is Mumbai, ports, Bandar Abbas and others in southern Iran, and then from Iran to the Caspian as a whole and the Caspian littoral states and Russia. So the Indians now they can have West Asia and Central Asia as part of the Silk Roads that they dream of. And from an Indian point of view, because of this immensely complex India-China competition, for them this is perfect because it allies them more closely geoeconomically with two fellow BRICS, which happen not to be China. And this is how the Indian ruling class thinks, this is really fascinating because, but in the end, we have what? We have all these Silk Roads, horizontal and vertical and maritime in the rimland across the Indian Ocean, and northern in the northern Silk Road towards the Arctic. They are all progressing in parallel, but in many aspects, they are also converging. For instance, these Indian Silk Roads, they are converging in Iran and even in parts of the Caspian and even in Afghanistan, because Iran also exports to Afghanistan. Iran can export Indian goods to Afghanistan. And, coming from Mumbai to southern Iran and then to Afghanistan, it's I think this road is a little over 100 kilometers. It's very, very close to the Afghan border, And at the same time, the Indians open Central Asian markets for them, which are essentially Russian and Chinese territory. That's how the Chinese do things. And that's how the Russians are starting to, the Russians are not thinking along these lines. They are starting to think along these lines when we see what they are planning for the Siberia and the Arctic. They want to do what the Chinese did to Xinjiang and then expand into the Silk Roads to develop the whole of the Far East in Russia and the whole of the Arctic. It's mind-boggling, the scope, the depth, the reach, and the seriousness of central governments, because this is being coordinated in Russia federally by Moscow. Of course, all the regional governments, all the provinces, but they all say, when you talk to them in Russia, they say, no, look at the investments from Moscow in all our projects and all that. That's how it works. And we didn't even talk about Vietnam, which is going to be a mega powerhouse of the 21st century. Ultra educated population, cohesive, pre-planning, you name it. Which from the Indian point of view is essential, because for India, it will open the possibility of more trade with Central Asia, with not only with Iran and Russia, but with Central Asian partners as well. So this is essential in the strategic Russia-Iran strategic partnership. And of course, energy, a lot of Russian investment to upgrade the energy grid in Iran, power plants, agriculture, tourism, more direct flights, you name it. So it's a really comprehensive partnership. The phone call between Xi and Putin was an absolute masterpiece, because so they watched YMCA, they saw what Trump said yesterday, and then they pick up the phone and say, okay, what is this guy up to for 1 hour and a half? It's absolutely fascinating. Obviously, we'll never know really what they talked about. What we know so far is that they didn't talk specifically about the Trump presidency. They talked about Russia-China relations. They talked about the war in Ukraine. They talked about basically BRICS geoeconomic preoccupations, etc. But the fact that the phone call took place immediately after the inauguration is as intriguing and fascinating as that signing in Moscow 3 days before the inauguration, last Friday, with Putin and Pezeshkian, the Iran-Russia strategic partnership, which this is it. My current column on the Credo is about the strategic partnership. What could that entail for BRICS relations, for global South relations, connectivity corridors, etc.? Because the number one geoeconomic vector of this deal is to accelerate the building of the international north-south transportation corridor. 3 top BRICS, with an extension to Azerbaijan, which could also mean an extension to Turkey later on. Because of the Caspian, Kazakhstan can also be part of it. So this means much more trade across the Caspian among all the Caspian littoral states, with Russia involved, of course. And of course, everything traveling in a multimodal corridor, like the INSTC across Iran down to the south, and then sea all the way to Mumbai in India. And of course, because it's 2 top BRICS with ramification to other BRICS as well, this should be a motive for Trump 2.0 and the Beltway to start paying attention to it. For the moment, absolutely nothing. I think they don't even understand what this strategic partnership means, as they don't understand what BRICS is. So you see a lot of overlapping, you see a lot of competition, of course, but a lot of overlapping and intersecting as well. And that's what makes it so fascinating. And obviously, the overall picture is that the US is completely absent of all these connectivity corridors, completely, totally out of all these connectivity corridors. So what does that tell us? Tells us that all these different parts of Asia, East Asia, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, West Asia, they are integrating inside themselves and with the other neighbors. And this was the original idea of the Silk Roads, of the Chinese Silk Roads. When the Chinese came up with the Silk Road concept, 2013, in the beginning, they were not very audacious. I remember very well. The other day, I was compiling old stuff, and I saw my first Silk Road article, which was written a few days after Xi Jinping inaugurated Silk Roads in Astana. Yeah. And they were relatively shy at the moment, but the main idea was already there. We want to link our western part of China, Xinjiang, with our neighbors. But then after a few years, the whole thing went all over the place, because it was our neighbors, was our southern neighbors, was northern neighbors, Trans-Siberian, Europe, you name it, right? And now we have the Shanghai port in Peru, which is the Maritime Silk Road in the South Pacific, which is something absolutely extraordinary. But at the time, they were, okay, at least we should have more closer relationship with our neighbors in Central Asia. And now look at what's going on now, what, less than 12 years after the start of the Silk Road. And very, very important to all of you, our audience, the planning for the new Silk Roads goes all the way to 2049. They planned in stages. It's typical Chinese 5-year plans and targets. So just to give you an idea, they start thinking about implementation of the new Silk Roads only 2 or 3 years ago. Before that, it was always pre-planning, planning, starting works, etc. So now the real work of building all these nodes of interconnecting nations, ports, corridors, inland ports, and it's starting only now. I found it fascinating, in fact, that he didn't even mention the EU, the European Union, and Europe as because obviously Trump considers Europe as part of the sphere of influence of empire. So they are already Christ and Chihuahuas, and that's it. They don't matter. What matters, on the other hand, is NATO. So for Trump, Europe is about NATO, and the EU is the Chihuahua arm of NATO. And he was very explicit. You got to pay up. So it's the return of the 5%, right? And it's fascinating because the new NATO Secretary General, Ruti Frutti, the stale Dutch Gouda, Mark Rutte, former prime minister, he started last week, even before the inauguration, telling nearly 500 million European citizens that now you got to pay up as well. So forget about cuts on your social service, on your health services, on your pensions, etc. Everybody needs to pay up a 5% of GDP for NATO. Otherwise, you're going to start speaking Russian or we have to immigrate to New Zealand. And he said that with a straight face. So this is very, very serious. Can you imagine the Americans striking serious deals with Southeast Asian nations? No. Their number one trade partner for all of the 10 in the ASEAN is China. And even with the Philippines, what can the Philippines offer the Americans? Assuming that they have an extraordinary BRICS style, some sort of deal collaboration, nothing, And what American hyper-capitalism they need expand their resource base. So the only credible roadmap ahead is these hardcore annexations, starting with Greenland. And let's ask Canadian public opinion what they think about being incorporated to the U.S. We know that Canadian business classes, we know they want,
of course,
but not the Canadian population. No way. And there's no way the empire can find new to be exploited latitudes across Eurasia. They can have a few deals here and there, but not hardcore colonies that can bring a lot of stuff that the empire really needs. For instance, relationship with Saudi Arabia. Trump is still obsessed with the Abraham Accords and having Israel and Saudi Arabia strike some sort of a relationship. This would be beneficial for Israel only, not for the US. And the Saudis, when I say the Saudis, in fact, everything goes back to MBS. MBS is in the highest fence ever, because he's looking on both sides. Okay, what do I do? How much longer can I postpone hedging my bets all the time? Sooner or later, it's going to, and the BRICS themselves are going to ask him to, okay, whose side are you really on? Are you with us? And then the Chinese are going to say, look, from now on, everything that we buy from you is Petro Yuan. So soon we are approaching this moment, So big decision. So what's left for the empire? Egypt, Jordan, joke. In Africa, forget it. There's when I was in South Africa in November, 2 months ago only, and wonderful conversations that we had in Johannesburg, and the Africans, not only South Africans, but Senegalese, Malinese, they were saying, look, the Americans have nothing to offer us. No wonder our relationships with Russia are improving, and no wonder the Chinese are everywhere. Of course. Well, if he slaps these tariffs, it's very simple. Southeast Asia will stop exporting to the US, and they will increase trade among themselves, which is already happening, and increase trade with China, India, Iran, Turkey, the Central Asians, etc. Central Asians, the same thing. They will increase their own geoeconomics with China and with Russia. So it's not that Eurasia as a whole, different parts of Eurasia, they absolutely need the American market. No. Not at all. Not at all. And they are solidifying a geoeconomic relationship all across Eurasia where they are literally self sufficient. They don't need the West, in fact. And that gets really, really serious. They could increase, for instance, trade with African nations. For instance, uh, the port of Mariupol in Donetsk. They are, you know, where they are focusing on in terms of expanding their markets? African nations. See, so this is something that, and now with this new development, and I would say accelerated development of the Caspian, the intra-Caspian trade is going to boomerang with the north-south corridor, you know. And then don't forget, in 2 or 3 years, we're going to have, this is what they are more or less thinking, Rosatom, no? Building the nuclear icebreakers in Russia. I talked to one of their engineers last year at the Vladivostok Forum. It was an amazing conversation. He said, look, maybe in between 2 or 3 years, we can have the full Northern Sea route open with our nuclear icebreakers, plus we are building another 4. They're going to be ready maybe in 4 to 5 until the end of this decade. And then you have the full itinerary of the North Sea route open for everybody. So everybody's going to profit from it. Not only China, but Japan, South Korea, everybody. So, you know, you don't need the empire for any of that. So the empire will keep, once again, exploiting the vassals in Europe. But what is the United States buying from Europe nowadays? Not much, apart from luxury products, which go to the 0.1%. There's not much, you know. And of course, once again, the Western Hemisphere.